I told you that your monthly mortgage payment could be cheaper than your Netflix subscription, you'd think I'm crazy, right? But in 2025, there really are places like this in America. And not just 125 towns. In some of them, owning a home is cheaper than buying a new iPhone. No, I'm not kidding. We're going to do the math and your mind will be blown. Let's dive deep into this, affordable home prices and low mortgage burden, because everyone's first question is it really that cheap? How can a payment lower than Netflix even be possible? The answer, yes, it's possible, but it depends on where you live. Look, let me give you an example. I mentioned Grenada, Mississippi. Here, the average home price is around $120,000. Let's say you put down 20%, finance the rest with a 30-year mortgage at 6% interest. Your monthly mortgage payment comes out to about $708. $708. In some cities, you can't even rent a studio apartment for that. Add up Netflix, Spotify, HBO, Amazon Prime, maybe $70.80 total. Owning a home in Grenada is possible for basically coffee money. That's why people are shocked. Another example, Toledo, Ohio. This is a typical Rust Belt city. Years of industrial decline, population loss, that's why home prices stayed low. According to Bankrate's research, the average home price in Toledo is around $120,000, $130,000. Mortgage payment, about $700-800 per month. Now think about it. In New York, you'd pay that just for a studio apartment rent, but here you can own a whole house. Now you're going to say, okay, home prices are low in cheap states, but what about big cities? Let's make a comparison. Take Detroit, Michigan as an example. Detroit has long been known as the capital of cheap housing, because the price per square foot was nearly half the US average. In some periods, you could find homes for $50.60000. Even today, you can still see 3-bedroom homes in Detroit for around $90.10000. Here too, the mortgage payment stays much lower than most people think. Imagine, for 30 years, you're just paying rent in New York, but for the same money in Detroit, you own the house. But it's not just the Midwest. There are opportunities in southern states too, like Birmingham, Alabama. Average home price is around $170,000. Monthly mortgage in the $900-$1,000 range. Yes, not as cheap as Netflix, but still incredibly affordable compared to the US average. Because nationwide, the average mortgage payment is around $2,100 to $300. So in Birmingham, you're paying almost half price. Here's the critical point. There are 2 reasons why mortgage payments in these towns are low. First, home prices are genuinely low. There's oversupply, demand is low. Second, cost of living is low. Since everything from groceries to electricity is more affordable, people can become homeowners on lower incomes. This balance is golden for investors. Now let me ask you a question. If it were you, would you rather pay $700, $800 monthly for a mortgage, or give that same money for rent in a big city? That's why choosing the right town can set you up financially for life. Now I'm going to tell you something very critical. The best way to understand if a home in America is cheap isn't just looking at the price tag. The real issue is the income-mortgage ratio. In other words, how heavy is the mortgage burden relative to what people in that area earn? This ratio shows you whether living there is really easy or hard. Think about it, you get excited about a $150,000 home, but if the average income in that area is $30,000 a year, that house might be expensive for someone living there. But if you're coming from another city with a higher income, it seems like funny money to you. That's why the concept of cheap by state isn't always the same. Let's look at examples. Let's start with Iowa. Iowa has been known for years as one of America's most affordable states. Median home price is around $150,000. Average household income is close to $75,000 per year, so the mortgage payment doesn't exceed 20-25% of income. This ratio is considered a healthy homeownership rate in America. It's possible for someone living in Iowa to both pay their mortgage and maintain their lifestyle. That's why Iowa always comes out on top of the lists. Now let's look at West Virginia. According to Rocket Mortgage's 2025 data, West Virginia is the cheapest state to buy a home in the US. Average home price is only around $146,000. But pay attention, income levels in West Virginia are below the national average. So for someone living there, this home might still be a bit of a burden. However, if you have a higher paying job or work remotely, this price can let you live like royalty. Another example is Mississippi. This state also consistently appears on cheap states lists. Average home price is around $160,000. Even though average income in Mississippi is low, the mortgage ratio is still advantageous compared to most states. Especially in small towns like Grenada, monthly payments can drop to $700-800. So Mississippi is a door of opportunity even for low-income locals. Let's also talk about Texas. Although median home prices have increased in some areas of Texas, especially around Austin and Dallas, rural areas are still very affordable, and income levels here are higher than many southern states. So the income-mortgage ratio provides an advantage. For example, in developing suburbs around Houston, mortgage burden is $1,000 $1,200 monthly, but incomes are also in the $80.90000 range. The ratio still makes sense. Bottom line, let me say this. As an investor, don't just ask, how much is the home price? Instead, ask this question. In this state, in this town, is this mortgage payment balanced with average income? If the ratio stays around 25-30%, that area is healthy for both living and investing. But if income is low and mortgage burden rises to 40-50%, there's risk there. Friend, that's the secret. Even if the price is low, the income-mortgage ratio tells you the truth. That's why Iowa is always a winner. West Virginia is cheap on paper, but requires caution. And Texas is a state that creates opportunities through income differential. Alright friend, now we've come to the most overlooked but actually most critical part: taxes, insurance, and natural risks. Because people generally focus on the home's price, saying, this house is only $150,000. Let's buy it now, but they don't think about the costs behind it. Yet sometimes these hidden costs can wake you from your cheaper than Netflix mortgage dream and make you say, I wish I hadn't bought it. Let's talk about this with examples. First, property taxes. Property taxes vary greatly from state to state in America. For example, in states like New Jersey and Illinois, you pay over 2% of the home's value as tax every year. Say you bought a $200,000 home. That's $4,000 a year just in taxes. That's $330 extra per month. If mortgage is $700, with taxes it becomes $1,000. But the good news is in some states, taxes are almost non-existent. In states like Hawaii, Alabama, and Louisiana, property tax rates are around 0.304%. So on a $200,000 home, you only pay $600 annually. That's a big difference that gives you clues in real cost calculations. This should be one of the first things you look at when choosing a cheap town. Second, insurance costs. When making mortgage payment calculations, most people only look at principal plus interest. But banks won't give you a loan without home insurance, and that's where the real surprise comes. For example, Florida. Home insurance in Florida has increased significantly in recent years because hurricane and flood risk is very high. Average annual insurance for a home is between $3,000 that's $250 $300 extra monthly burden. You calculated the mortgage at $800, but suddenly with insurance it became $1,100. That's why just looking at the mortgage isn't enough. On the other hand, in states like Ohio or Iowa where hurricane and flood risk is low, insurance can stay under $1,000 annually. You get away with $70.80 extra monthly expense. The same priced home costs you completely different amounts because of insurance differences. Third, natural risks. Yes, friend, this is the most dangerous part. Because natural risk doesn't just mean insurance costs, it also means a factor that directly affects the home's value. For example, Florida, Louisiana, Texas coastal towns, high hurricane risk. Homes are nice, mortgage looks cheap, but every year when storm season comes, you're stressed. California, earthquake risk. Earthquake insurance is a separate and expensive cost. Average home prices are already high, plus extra insurance burden reaches serious numbers. Midwest, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, tornado risk. In some towns, because of this risk, both insurance premiums rise and long-term buyer demand can drop. But the good news is this: in states like Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Ohio, Pennsylvania, natural disaster risk is relatively low. This ensures home values remain more stable. So as an investor, you can find the cheap plus low risk combination here. Now think, friend, you found a home, price is $120,000. Monthly mortgage is $750. Isn't that great? But taxes are $300, insurance is $250, total became $1,300. That's what we call the real total cost of ownership. Many investors who jump in without making these calculations are shocked later. So my advice to you is this: if you're looking at homes in a town, definitely ask these questions. 1. What is the property tax rate? 2. How much is home insurance annually? 3. Are there risks like hurricanes, floods, earthquakes in this area? 4. What risks does insurance not cover? If you don't get answers to these questions, the cheaper than Netflix dream can quickly turn into a nightmare. Migration trends and remote work. Now let me tell you this: what deter me?